We don't actually get asked this question a ton, but it's at the core of a lot of our brokerage clients, and that is, how can they effectively scale? Businesses are essentially systems. They are an efficient way to provide value to the external customers that you serve that pay your bills, and the internal customers that you serve that are colleagues and employees who have to execute certain parts of the system's processes. So scaling essentially becomes a challenge of how to build a system that allows people to help contribute to the goal of making profit by maximizing their individual valuable time. So we'll talk about how it is that you can use ChatGPT both as a standalone chat as well as building an AI employee to help that onboarding process. Because at the end of it, if you're a brokerage, the core of what you need to do is have a significant number of net new agents. So in other words, you need to go out and recruit and recruit and recruit, and it's a miserable process. But you also need to make sure that you're not losing agents at the same time that you're recruiting. So if you recruit 10 agents, you don't want to lose 9, because that essentially means you just have one new revenue producing agent inside of your brokerage. And more than likely, you have less than one new revenue producing agent, because of those 9, you may have lost 1, 2, or 3 that are actually producing and 5 or 6 that aren't. So if you've brought in 10, you either need to bring in 10 high producers or just hopefully not lose your shirt on it. And losing your shirt, not losing your shirt, is not a business strategy. So all of that said, how can we get started with this inside of ChatGPT? Well, just like a lot of times, you need to have your ideal client profile well defined. And that goes with the type of agents that you want to recruit. You need to identify who it is that you want inside of your brokerage. You can use the ideal client profiler to be able to do that, or you can create your own ideal client profile. Either way, you have to look at your agents as clients. They are not contractors. They are clients. They are relying on you to provide a valuable service so that they can go out and produce, and that service being structure and guidance. So we drop in our ideal client profile here. We call ours Agent Alice, and we'll say, analyze this profile, respond with, and nothing else when done. Right? So essentially what we're doing is we're training this particular chat on understanding who it is that we're speaking about. So now we want to follow this up with looking at our agent. What might be the biggest challenges they have to overcome when joining my brokerage? This can be general in nature until I provide more information about our onboarding process. Let's start general. Right, so we're asking essentially for ideas. We're not asking for anything else here. We're just asking for the chat to leverage the large amount of training information to be able to say, what are some general challenges? And here, based on that ideal client profile, remember, not all agents. We don't want to recruit every agent to our brokerage. We only want the agents that fit our brokerage. Adapting to new systems and processes, very general, balancing frugality with upfront investments, maintaining a unique brand identity, time management, keeping up with market volatility, trust and collaboration, all very important challenges to overcome. And as somebody that earned his license for the sake of being able to understand the process, I can tell you that new systems and processes were some of the biggest complaints I had when I got started, because nobody had them. And for a company that I run that is built exclusively on understanding systems and processes, we need to be able to see what it is that is provided. Frugality and upfront investments, right? I'm not necessarily what people would consider frugal because I'm willing to invest quite a bit to ensure that I'm successful. Either way, all of these different tasks, you can sit there and say, now evaluate these challenges against my onboarding process. And this is where you can drop in training documentation, a process diagram, whatever it might be. So let's pretend at this point we don't have a well-defined process. So we want to say something like, all right, we don't have a well-defined onboarding process. We have a 90-minute onboarding meeting where we deliver login info and we generate access passwords and documentation as access is given to different systems. What might our problems be with that method? And we'll leave it at that, right? So now we're just identifying what a good number of those undesirable effects are, right? Things like information overload, limited hands-on practice, insufficient personalization, risk of ongoing support gaps. All of these different things might very well define our process. And let's ask a question here saying, all right, taking all those effects, what might be the core conflict we have to overcome? In other words, what is our evaporating cloud we have to resolve with a better onboarding process? So if you have any familiarity with the thinking process of Eli Goldratt, you know this is essentially what we're going through. We're evaluating what is taking place now. And we might be able to say what our core conflict is really a competition between prioritizing thoroughness, which means onboarding becomes time-consuming, complex, and potentially overwhelming, and we prioritize brevity, which means agents leave the session underprepared or shallow understanding. And so we have to challenge and design an onboarding process that doesn't pit depth against brevity. So in other words, we want to provide a very good structured knowledge system that somebody can rely on to take their initial steps in the industry, while at the same time leaning into that sense of brevity so that it's not overwhelming and it doesn't take a tremendous amount of time on the part of these agents that we're trying to get out there to help make money. So taking that conflict we have to resolve, can you design me a step-by-step onboarding process? Right? And we've essentially trained all of the AI chat here to help us come up with ideas. And it says we have a pre-onboarding process, an core onboarding process, where it actually breaks it down into minutes, right? An immediate follow-up process, micro-training checkpoint process, a 30-day progress review, and then an ongoing learning and community process. So what we've essentially done here is define for ourselves how to provide a very detailed and thorough onboarding process for our agents. And this process that we went through, where you identify that core conflict and identify ways to resolve that conflict and get implementation tips, is a very quick thinking process that was developed based on the theory of constraints by Dr. Goldratt. And in fact, we have an AI employee specifically trained to resolve this onboarding process so that you can scale. So let's go ahead and open up that AI employee and resolve some conflicts. So this specific AI employee that we've trained, you can find the link below. Use it to your heart's delight. You just get started by saying, let's solve some problems. And we're going to start with just setting expectations. The thinking process, you can't be hands-off with it. You can't just simply rely on AI. This AI process is trained to help spur conversation and thought. And even though we're going to walk through it in just a few minutes, you want to be an active participant in that process. So we say, yes, I agree. Let's get started. And it's going to go through and ask for some of that information. So again, we go back to our ideal client profile. We want to know who it is that we're talking about here. And you can just paste it in and then move on to the next question. So, and it's going to give us some idea of who it is that we're talking about and give us a reflection of that understanding and give us an idea of making sure that we're getting an accurate reflection of who it is that we're trying to resolve. So I'm going to let it go through this, and then we'll come back and continue the process. So the next question in the process is asking us to describe our problem. And so in this case, we're trying to say, we're not preparing Alice for success. When we recruit new agents, they are not prepared to efficiently, thoroughly, and effectively market their services or conduct the administration of transactions, right? It can be something as simple as that, right? And so essentially you're saying that core challenge is that they're just not prepared. And so now we're talking about perceived barriers. And this would be the biggest barrier is time. We simply don't have the time to train these agents the way we want them to be trained, right? They need to start making money as soon as possible because they are contractors. There's no salary. As well, long training is expensive training. And we don't generate enough revenue to pay for that. All right. So these barriers are all talking about the fact that we need to train these agents well, but there are time and financial considerations that we have to take into account. So previous solution attempts, and this is where it's going to ask for solutions that didn't work at all, solutions that worked maybe a little bit but didn't fully resolve the problem, any sort of lessons we might have learned. We hired a trainer, but it became cost prohibitive. So the training was better than what we provided now, but not exactly adequate. Compared to cost, not worth the value proposition. Right? And that might be something that sounds familiar to you. But now we've essentially given this AI employee some information that it can use to move forward with the process. And now it's going to generate these undesirable effects, which are the symptoms of the core problem. And so I'm going to let it generate those, and then we'll come back and review them. So here are all the undesirable effects, right? And these might seem like core challenge, but they're really just symptoms. New agents take too long to be productive, struggle with marketing, trial and error, relies too heavily on management, revenue growth is slow, inconsistent quality of experiences, we can't recruit, there's a high churn rate, and we're missing opportunities in the market, all of which are very clear consequences of the decisions that are being made. And we'd say, yeah, this accurately represents our undesirable effects at the time, but if we needed to make changes, this is part where you'd have that conversation. So we just want to say, looks good, continue. And we start to go through, and now we're building what's called a current reality tree, which starts to identify the root causes of these challenges. I'm going to let it go ahead and create that again, and we'll come right back. So the current reality tree essentially goes through a process of if-then statements, right? So for example, we have a lack of structured training. So that means if we have a lack of structured training, then agents rely on trial and error. And if agents rely on trial and error, then agents take too long to become productive. And if agents take too long to become productive, their revenue growth is slower than expected. And if agents are struggling with their revenue growth and their marketing, then in trying to chase that next deal, they have inconsistent branding, their lead generation changes, it's just weak, it's not good. All the way that this comes down to is essentially that we have 3 core root causes, and that there's nothing here that's scalable, that we have limited training time, that time is a key constraint, and leadership as a result doesn't really have the bandwidth to tackle the challenge and personally train these agents. The key takeaway from it here is that it isn't a lack of training that is the core problem. It's the inability to provide scalable, cost-effective training that doesn't eat up time. And we might say, you know, this looks good, but also we'd want to go through this thought process over and over again. Now we're talking about the core conflict, and this is what we talked about earlier when we were just doing this from a fresh chat. And it's going to go through, provide this. We'll come back, chat about it again in a second. So it's gone through this, and essentially this is the core conflict that we have to resolve, that we need to provide agents with comprehensive training so that they can be successful, but we also need to minimize the time and cost so that they can start earning money and that we don't overspend. So in other words, there's a conflict between the need to be comprehensive and the need to be quick and cheap. And how do we resolve that conflict essentially comes up with our solution we end up implementing so that we can scale. So we say, you know, that looks good, continue. And again, the AI employee will continue to facilitate that conversation with you and your team to be able to think through this process. So here are the assumptions: creating the conflict, the evaporating cloud, let it develop. We'll come back and discuss it in a second. So the resolution that comes up with, right, we look at what that core conflict says we need to have. We need to have well-trained agents, and they need to be able to get started very quickly. The assumptions that this conflict has to operate, these are assumptions that we have to challenge, is that training takes a long time, training is expensive, and low-cost training is inherently lower quality. So we resolve that by using AI-powered or automation-assisted training systems that we can use to deliver high-value training in a condensed format. And why is this good? Because we can still provide the training as brokers. We can still provide the guidance, because remember, what's important for every AI employee, which is just another way of saying process, is the data. It's not the prompts. And the data that we want to provide to an AI trainer is our training expertise and knowledge. We can absolutely provide all of that. So we say all of this looks fantastic. All of this looks fantastic. How might we create 1, asynchronous courses to conduct this training, and 2, create custom GPTs to assist and facilitate this training? All right, so now we're starting to get to the core of how it is that we implement this solution. Right. So the asynchronous training courses, self-structured, self-paced. We start with short, focused lessons, interactive content, hands-on applications, and automated progress tracking, all of which we can do inside of Lesix Pro if we were a broker and we wanted to do that. And it gives you everything that you need to do here to implement this solution. So now you can actually get assistance from other key agents inside of your brokerage, other brokers, whatever it might be, to implement the solution. You can also start to train Q&A, custom GPTs on training topics, simulations, step-by-step guidance, automated feedback, and GPTs, right? So define your AI personas, train the GPTs with custom knowledge, deploy the GPTs in multiple channels, and monitor and optimize the performance. So again, it gives you the step-by-step on how to do that. And it even gives you a solution here that you can use to pilot the solution, develop a prototype, and start leaning into it. And here it even starts to say, would you like some tips on specific tools to build these solutions, automation software and LMS, AI platform, whatever it might be. The point of all of this being is that the way that you scale is by solving your key constraint. Look, every business's scalability is limited by one constraint in that business. I mean, that's it. That's just a universal rule that we live by, that if you solve one constraint, you generally resolve all of those problems. And that constraint is defined by what that core conflict is. When you resolve that core conflict by questioning those assumptions and tackling it with innovative approaches, you can come up with something that frees your time, frees your revenue, and allows your agents to go out there as a brokerage to generate more revenue. And guess what? This process is so universal that you can do it as an individual agent in terms of understanding how it is that you help your ideal clients find their best properties. You can do it as a real estate school by training and helping your students grow. As an association looking to provide value to your individual students, you can use the thinking process to absolutely find ways to scale your business, grow it profitably, and fulfill that core mission of making a profit and money for your real estate brokerage.